Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. Sorry for this bit of a strange setting. It is, as you know, how we have to do it because of the epidemic. So tonight we are very happy to welcome Gago Gagoshidze and Miloš Trakilović. They came all the way from Berlin. And today they will be talking about their work, Mission Accomplished Balenciaga, which they did together with Hito Steyerl in 2019. And this work is now part of the exhibition of bread, wine, security, cars, and peace, curated by BELANCIEGE, the directors of Kunsthalle Wien. So Miloš is born in
89.
I wasn't talking about
I think
that.
I can say it.
Okay, very good. Very good. And your work is about politics of perception related to your own biography and related to also basics related to certain situations of war. You're basically working on images and and you are. I wasn't again thinking. And you're also working on politics of perception and distribution and production of moving images. Very short summary, condensed one. So the floor is yours. So they will just give a small introduction, and then we will watch the movie together, and then there will be a small talk, and then there will be questions. Yeah?
Yes. I think Aziza did the general introduction. Our suggestion is maybe that we just watch the video because it's quite long. It's 47 minutes. So then you guys, for those who haven't seen it, are also familiar with the content because it's quite content loaded. So maybe it's smarter to just start with a screening, and then Gago and me can do a general introduction and talk a bit more, and of course receive the questions that you have afterwards. So can we just loop it from the beginning and watch it?
Reza, please.
Oh, and of course, thanks for coming tonight and taking your time on such a beautiful day to
be inside.
To be inside with us.
No, I started.
Years ago, the Berlin Wall came down. Or did it?
There's a quasi-mathematical riddle I recently stumbled upon. You have 100 meters worth of raw material. Now, how do you fence in the largest surface area?
This is Mikhail Saakashvili. He's an ex-president of post-Soviet Georgia. Misha is not on the wall, but on the roof. He is soon to become stateless, and riot police will arrest him. Misha has been up the roof for 6 hours now, where he is threatening to jump down. But the most important question is, what is he wearing? We don't see his shoes, so we don't know if he's wearing those. Why would we shall be wearing Balenciaga for this mission? Well, we will never know, but probably it's a good choice. Here is Kanye West wearing something similar.
How did Misha get up that roof? Well, to clear things up, we need to start from the beginning.
Batman was like a DARPA of fashion, a lab to test fashion politics, and to playtest a zombie apocalypse skinhead aesthetics. Balenciaga in turn is more like a corporate aircraft carrier. And at Balenciaga, show goes on.
So where is in and where is outside in this blue space? Are we inside of the bag and is the bag turned inside out? Or are we outside of the bag when it's outside? For the most recent summer 2020 collection, Balenciaga remodeled the film studio in Paris to resemble the European Parliament in Strasbourg. But the setup in which this spectacle took place bears another striking resemblance, namely to Dante's Inferno. As depicted here on the 15th century woodcuts by Antonio Manetti, you can see that it is most akin to scene number 1, everything reduced to one plan. And again, this is not about Balenciaga. This is about what it models.
How does one create such a stage? We have made a model for you. So this is basically a model of the stage. Basically what you do is you take an IKEA bag, you cut it open, and then you twist it and you glue it back together as some kind of Möbius band. Now, what is the advantage of having a Möbius band? Because if you have a Möbius band, the inside and the outside actually are on the same plane, which means that there is no more difference between in and outside, and also that you're free to privatize both. The illusion that everything will take place on one single plane only arises if you watch it from above. If you see it from up there, there's hardly any difference between top and bottom. But if you see the same situation from eye level, it will look exactly like the set you see here, jagged and massive cuts and income inequality. If where you are sitting represents the price level of an IKEA bag, then the price level of a Balenciaga IKEA bag would come to hover around 1,125 meters above this building. And you would have to actually see it from space to even remotely create the illusion that both happen on the same plane. If you see them horizontally though, it becomes very apparent that top and bottom diverge and that they had long ago ceased to be even remotely similar planes. Let's show you how inequality is structured nowadays. This is the task. This is before 89. As you all know, this is the famous slogan, proletarians of all countries unite, a quotation from the famous Communist Manifesto. After 89, this is what inequality looks like, and this slogan actually says, proletarians of all identities unite. This is a photo that Miloš took in Sarajevo on the occasion of its first ever Pride March that happened earlier this year. And this was under threat by all sorts of violent religious nationalists. And the banner makes clear that even if in the meantime nations have become maybe not exchanged, but at least heavily supplemented by identities, one thing hasn't changed, namely that proletarians still exist. Identity is currently an opioid for the masses. It's a free handout for people who have little else. But like a lot of seemingly free stuff in digital economies, it comes with a lot of toxic strings attached, above all the idea that you cannot change. Identities are a trap to keep people in their places and divide them. For example, as either Team Croc or Team Chanel.
Are you familiar with Kanye West? Sure. This is Kanye's sneaker, the last sneaker he released when he was on, still under contract with Nike.
Well, you have blown my mind on the last two sneakers, so I hesitate. I'm going to go big on this.
Go big or go home, Bernie.
And I'm weird to say $1,000. Again.
What is the resale value of the Red October? $11,000.
A bit off route from the march that you've just seen in Sarajevo, I found this, a Balenciaga sneaker for its many citizens that survived an actual siege on the run, but cannot afford the brand product. Now this shoe is clearly not a Croc, nor is it a Chanel, but what if it is not fake either? The Balenciaga sneaker may be what the proletarian pride protesters are wearing to confront religious and nationalist adversaries because they may be able to afford it. And not only that, but they quite frankly might not even give much of a damn whether it is fake or not. Because if identity is indeed a property for those who own nothing else, then this means that that same property can also be dismantled. Sarajevo is a place literally besieged by identity. It is therefore not a coincidence that clues towards overcoming identity might originate in a country like Bosnia and Herzegovina, a country that has long since been debilitated, paralyzed and plundered to the max on the basis of ethno-nationalist segregationist politics. The power of three here has shifted into Bosnia's dysfunctional tripartite presidency, and the EU uses such border areas as storage zones where corrupt police robs and beats back unwanted refugees, leaving Bosnian municipalities like, for example, Bihać, to fend with the migrants' misery. The systematic militarization of security forces as a response to the current refugee and migration flow is ongoing. Rebellion against identity is underway in many other similar places, like Lebanon or Iraq. Just as here, people are realizing that divisive identities screwed them over, and that the only way out is to change the rules of the game.
This is not the only example of Balenciaga. Those are not fake items. They are indications that proletarians are claiming back their shoes. This is how to distinguish a real Balenciaga from Balenciaga. As with every trend, we have to rely on a power of three to confirm it's real. Now, a Balenciaga never appears on a catwalk, nor expensive shopping windows, but they are validated as a real Balenciaga through three different ways of using them. This is the first step. The shoe has to be used in a protest within the United Nations General Assembly by being banged on the table, as modeled here by famous influential Nikita Khrushchev. Second step. The shoe proves its usefulness by being eatable. The worst case, one is to be able to eat the Balenciaga shoes, as demonstrated here by top model Werner Herzog, who ate his shoes with onions. The third step. A Balenciaga needs to defy gravity to travel towards the cosmos like a spaceship. As demonstrated here, Mr. Al-Zaidi attempts to shoot George Bush. Unfortunately, he missed it, so this specific shoe could not be confirmed as a real Balenciaga sneakers. The nature of the shoe is defined by its overall value. When exchange value of the shoe grows, its find value automatically declines. It simply becomes too expensive to throw, or potentially even to wear. They are only useful for Instagram selfies. Balenciaga are defined by their exquisite practical values.
Balenciaga might also be the symptom of countless sieges still taking place. Those no longer exclusively forged by national governments, fences or walls, but by corporate tech firms, firewalls, cloud computing systems, and fiber optic brand autocracies that warrant visibility if it's in the benefit of monopolist platforms. Which might also explain why I never found those pictures of my father's wartime fashion show. Whereas they resorted to fashion because they felt invisible amidst a highly mediatized war, today we live an inverted principle in which endless online showcasings are governed by dot-com corporate giants and transnational turbo-capitalist regimes, whose own mechanisms of conquest extend into the infosphere and are generally rendered invisible. Seen from today's perspective of relentless social media activity and brand propagation, my father's fashion show never happened. Those images don't exist because they're simply not profitable.
Instead, this is what's going on. Let's have a look at the live comments from the stream you're just watching. This is Gucci-bot 73456 4 minutes ago, and he yells nationalize Balenciaga using a lot of unicorn emojis, to which Fractaboy replies, Balenciaga is bigger than any nation. And then this gives Team Geskia Forever 71 the opportunity to chime in and suggest that perhaps Balenciaga could be nationalized to the Cayman Islands. The thing we didn't tell you is that we asked Christopher Wiley to program a bot trap to monitor paid PR and disinformation in real time on the stream, and according to his exclusive analysis, 45% of the fashion bots on here are Russian, 75% are Ukrainian, the overlap being caused by double agents, their lawyers, stylists, and DARPA-trained makeup artists. The remaining 276% belong to different haute couture, cultural warfare departments. So we asked Wiley to design a back-end bot trap to sequester them in some kind of bot inferno, where they can design summer collections until the end of time. You are sitting right inside this bot trap. Specifically, they are being trapped under your butts, and here, in this soft blue limbo, they can try to lure the alt-right to their AI-rendered jean styles, or automate fashion by pulling user hashtags, thus making designers superfluous. This was a bit of fake news, but very seriously, the idea of nationalization without a nation is actually very useful. What, if not Balenciaga, but actually Balenciaga, was actually an anticipation of an enterprise which actually belongs to the people who work for it, not only in material, but also in an image way. If a style is user co-produced, user controlled, and even managed. Sure, now you're going to say, dream on, this is completely impossible and unthinkable and unlikely, and anyway, it won't happen, but please look at this dude here. As you will certainly immediately recognize, this is the Hof standing on top of the Berlin Wall. And actually, as you might know, there was a 0.0 possibility of this ever happening. So now I think this is Chris Wiley. We asked him to, hey Chris? Oh, yes. Well, yeah, it's Hito speaking. so much for calling. Yes, it's very generous of you to say so, and I totally agree your point. They are saying we look crap. We look complete crap. And they are offering to get you some sets of clothes. No. For me, I don't wear base caps. I'm sorry. Have you looked at my hair? This really doesn't work for me, but maybe, I can ask the guys if they want to have some sponsored clothes. You would have to negotiate with them directly because I can't make this call, but are you going to pay them at all? Well, I don't think this is going to work, but anyway, I will pass you on, and then you can do those negotiations directly, okay? Wait.
Quando eu miro ce și mă cauză de sancele, de mă rog, ce никогда звали стандарты. $11,000. Hello? Hello? 11,000. No less than that. No.
Yeah, it was 47 minutes. It's quite a ride. As I said before, it's a very information-ridden work with a lot of content, and I think to maybe start off saying something about the nature of this collaboration between Gago, Hito, and me is that it's obviously not a joke, but it started with a lot of jokes. It started with a lot of humor, and the basic question that we asked ourselves when we started thinking about this work, or before, is how come that this brand Balenciaga, especially under Demna's influence, became so popular and extended also their presence not only in the fashion industry but also in the art field, in many aspects of life. So this was our basic question, which we tried to answer for ourselves, and none of us are any experts in fashion whatsoever. So the obvious thing that we did is we relied on some loose associations that we could draw and try to offer these perspectives and then align them and maybe create a sort of playful narrative which resulted in this work in the end. But just thinking about fashion, I think one of the first ideas that we have as an industry, fashion as an industry, is an industry that claims to offer some sort of perspective on the future, right? It sort of dictates trends, it's always one step forward and so on. So we took this idea and started seeing, okay, how can we apply this to the context of Balenciaga? And I think especially for Gago, it was very clear that under Demna's influence, all the looks that he's been sending down runways were not new to us. And I think it had to do with the fact that we both have concrete biographies in Eastern Europe. So a lot of these influences that he took from post-Soviet Georgia were not new to us. And we actually took up this logic and tried to map it on some wider social, political aspects of our lives. Most notably the aspect of privatization and things like inequality and populism, which we contextualized through the Eastern European experience, right? And the Eastern European experience is usually always seen as what was mentioned in the video as an experience that is lagging behind Western democracies. So it is always behind the future, so to speak. And we try to take this idea and flip it around and think about the fact, well, what if these experiences that we could narrate, that we have experienced, were not behind, if we look at certain situations that are happening in the world, like Trump's America, Brexit, the general rise of populism. So yeah, this was, I think, our basic structure to deal with the fundamental question of how come that this brand is everywhere.
Yeah, but also and thank you very much for organizing it and for coming, and happy to be here. And and what's also very important, we mentioned a few times in the video that this work is not about Balenciaga, but it's not neither about like early 90s or collapsing the Soviet Union, but it's about contemporary, like a present time, economical and political times of nowadays. But in order to somehow understand and having clear picture of the contemporary time, it's essentially like very important to somehow understand where, for example, like in a history, like the paradigmic change of like a political and the economic paradigm change, which kind of leaded contemporary political and economical context. So that's why we somehow like used Balenciaga as a kind of methodology, which is kind of functions as a kind of like, because what changed in the economical way and political way that like after the collapse of the Soviet Union, like as a perestroika, as a kind of reform was like presented as a kind of like the only way to do things, like in a better way to catch up with democracy, like with the Western European countries, is to like start privatizing everything. So whatever was public, everything was privatized. And in this case, Balenciaga also functions with exactly the same kind of like the setting and models, which is also like privatizing the collapse of the political and economical the framework, which leads to this kind of certain kind of aesthetics, which was also created by this collapse. And Balenciaga was the vêtement Balenciaga, many other brands, but in this case we are focusing on Balenciaga, which is also like picking up is like the aesthetics and branding it and like how to say like
making them sort of exclusive in a way.
Exclusive, yeah, and kind of like monetizing and just like bringing it to the market. This like aesthetics of kind of collapse, like infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean this is a very important part, but I think the challenge was also to try to think a little bit deeper, not just the aesthetic surface level, because this is maybe very obvious and this is nothing new. Appropriation happens and many times, especially in an industry like fashion. So we try to think, okay, what are like the mechanisms underneath all of this, not only the visual aesthetic ones, but in terms of how this brand is structured. Like traditionally, maybe a brand of Balenciaga's importance would have clear marketing strategies, they would have a clear target audience, but Balenciaga achieves actually their omnipresence by a lot of online platforms that they use. So actually the brand sets up a framework and all the users contribute through this. So it's also a layered aspect of privatization and not only about dictating consumer culture as a fashion brand, but it's also a question about who actually does all the work.
Yeah, and it's also like very important is what you mentioned.
Sorry? I mean, these are the questions that we sort of have in mind, which we try to discuss or try to bring up in this video, just to offer you like a few pockets, because there's a lot that are intertwined.
And it's also like a kind of like it deals with the new set of like labor, which is also like a instead of like producing something, like curating already existing like materials or like resources, because like not like what you just like Miloš just said, like you just have like unpaid laborers which are doing stuff for you.
So on many of these levels, you know, the technological one, the aesthetical one, the cultural one, the social one. And I think what we tried to do with this work is to like bring all these perspectives together, or like just layer them into some sort of sediments of narrations, because it's a lot of narration. And I hope, or the way I see it, and I hope that this is something that we achieved with this work, is that you can pick elements of whatever comes shooting at you and still make some sort of sense of it. So I don't think we try to approach these questions with any sort of knowledge or any sort of claims of truth. We present this through our practices and through our ways of thinking, but it's up to people to just take it as truthful or not. So it's a lot of analogies, a lot of associations that are braided together through these three perspectives in a really long TED talk on steroids, I like to call it. Like so good.
There's a question.
Yes, question.
I think it was fantastic and what I like most is privatized property or Dante's Inferno, the stage what we have here. So who did the main concept of it and how did you get this Hito Steyerl
What do you mean main concept? Well, it was like
It was a joke. It started by making jokes with each other because Gago and me also studied with Hito and we've been friends for a long while. So we spent a lot of time together and it's always full of humor. And I think something that starts as a joke can actually have a huge impact. So we joked around the fact that everything these days is Balenciaga. You can just put on a brand everywhere. So we started thinking about these things together, and we personally brought these elements of, well, biographical elements, which had to do with reflecting on the Eastern European experience, especially also because this video, we did it in November 2019, which was the 30 years anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. So we took really this period in time to try to reflect, okay, what actually happened from 89 to now, if you look at the collapse of communist countries and socialist countries and how this privatization worked there and how it actually works now.
But if you mean like a practical way of like dealing with these ideas, it's like all three of us had like different ways of like perspectives of experiencing these periods of time and contemporary time. So we just created food where we're just throwing everything inside and together with like a kind of like giving a shape.
Last question, your father was really a fashion designer?
He was not a fashion designer. I get this question a lot. My father passed away, so I couldn't discuss this thoroughly with him. So I relied on a lot of detective work, but I know for a fact that he told me this is a biographical real story, that they, during the war, where he worked as a journalist in Bosnia, they set up a fashion show in '94. And their motive was to try to make themselves somehow visible, you know, in this presence of war. And yeah, I tried to sort of backtrack a lot of these elements, and I couldn't get really far. There was evidence of it in local television stations, but somehow nobody had any kind of footage or material that I had. And this is what he kind of took up to create these parallels between maybe not only fashion then, but just violence, war, and the whole spectrum behind it.
Sorry, your father died in the war?
No.
And the picture or the guy on the burning car was...
No, that's Kanye West. I mean, this is also one of these parallels, right, where we introduce these characters, whether they're pop culture or turbo culture from the Balkans or political players, and try to put them in perspective with some of these same characters today, like Kanye West, Kim Kardashian, Donald Trump, and the whole plethora of politics, which is essentially the same. It is based on nationalism, on populism, on extreme inequality. But the only difference is that maybe these days it's not as visible, or it's not being done through the same mechanisms as maybe the experience in the 90s.
What I really like about what the whole mix of topics shows is that like a banal act of buying shoes actually really puts you in the matrix of a huge global power dynamics. So my question is, how easy is it for you to buy shoes nowadays?
It's not easy because I'm a size 47, so I don't get to choose. I just take whatever they have. Yeah, I mean, this is a factor where
I don't buy shoes. I was grateful.
Yeah, how to, you're always complicit in these structures and mechanisms. The only question is in how far you are aware, or how far you can actually be conscious of these things these days. I think what we try to do is really dismantle these logics of how trends are being made these days, also through a technological perspective. So we looked at how targeted advertisements works, how these hidden structures of algorithmic governance actually determine trends and constitute trends. And I think what we hoped to achieve in the end is by posing the question, okay, well, if Balenciaga is a brand that actually relies on consumers' contribution, why shouldn't the consumers be in charge of this brand? So we tried to do this with the fake or the Balenciage sneaker, which is actually seen as a fraudulent, non-original item, and place it in a position of power, so to rebrand it. And I think this is also maybe somewhere the answer of your question, to just maybe approach it with a different attitude.
Why not fake products?
Well, yeah, I mean, kind of empower them, you know, empower or kind of disassociate yourself with these mainstream mechanisms by choosing a different way.
Can I ask, why these fake sneakers have this kind of French pronunciation?
Well, everybody pronounces it differently. Like
How you say it here, or
yeah,
which one?
like Balenciaga. What sounds for me kind of like it's a French accent. Balenciaga, or
Yeah, it's not because we talk also about siege as a kind of like circling the city, like this.
This is the logic, because the shoe was found in Sarajevo, and we already like narrate the history of Sarajevo, which was the longest siege in modern history of the capital. So we just kind of adapted this pronunciation because the association is with siege. Yeah. But it's actually what was written on the sneaker is the Balenciaga. Yeah.
Did you get any response from Balenciaga?
Yes. We're waiting for them to buy. I don't know. It was a little bit also interesting collaboration from various perspectives, from our own generational perspectives and also biographical perspectives, and maybe especially sometimes tricky for me because I do have a lot of friends that work for the brand. I know a lot of people who are involved with Balenciaga. They're my immediate surroundings. So for me, it was not always easy to like take a position where I would criticize something to which I felt I also belong. And it's also a generational aspect of the 89 generation. But through these connections, I know that it reached also, of course, the headquarters. And the information I got is that Demna was disappointed that he was not invited to the opening. We didn't invite him. I mean, we didn't have this contest. But maybe, I mean, to respond in a way, we also disassociated ourselves from Balenciaga at certain moments. So this is why you, in the work, have this repetition about, actually it's not about Balenciaga, it's about larger structures of social and political organization in which Balenciaga is only an element, you know. So we actually applied the same logics of trending and branding onto them. So we just use them to actually tell our story, which has nothing to do with the brand. It has more to do with the social, political, and economic constructs to which we belong.
Thank you very much for your screening and for your conversation. It's super interesting. I'm also not don't have any knowledge on fashion whatsoever, but I had this thought, and I was quite curious that, like for example, several brands which I would think that they are kind of same as Balenciaga, for example, Gagoshidze, they were not mentioned there. And during the screening, I had an idea that actually it's quite interesting to think that. Especially in the context of so-called New East, like as you might know, like this kind of cover journal, this kind of very specific type of representation of Eastern Europe, art and culture, that it actually produced quite a different type of politics as well. Like especially when you compare this kind of Georgian states, transfers and exchanges, but also very particular, I would say, post-imperial Russian situation, which was also a bit mentioned. And then I'm wondering if you had something in mind here about also very similar ideas of appropriation of thin fashion, of this kind of Eastern European 90s poverty, etc., in the fashion industry as well, but actually which might produce very different types of politics as well, comparing to Balenciaga and to Russia in general.
I mean, we joked about this also many times, that you could actually make so many sequels, you know, it's never ending, because the way also we worked was gathering material and putting everything up on piles, and a lot of it was also edited out, but you can go endlessly with these kind of narrations and make sequels. Just with Balenciaga, every show that they do, you could make a response similar to this kind. So I think what you say is really plausible. You can do this also in many other instances in brands. I'm just afraid that we would be stuck in the same circle of hell that we're trying to get out of, you know. This is why, I mean, in a way it's recognizable. This methodology is not something that is particular to Balenciaga. We're just wondering how come that this brand is so celebrated as the number one selling brand across disciplines.
Also what you mentioned about like brands, I don't know if I got it correctly, this question, correct me if I'm wrong. That like, for example, like the fashion brands also kind of carrying some kind of political message or something like that.
No, I would say not like open politics, but I was just curious that, like, for example, with some particular brands coming from example, from Russia and who are based in Russia and who use a lot of Eastern European aesthetics, but they actually, like this appropriation would actually mean different things politically. You know, like I'm not speaking about open politics, but if you read them and if you kind of put them into the political context, perhaps they would produce, and that's fine. Of course, I'm not meaning that.
I'm completely aware of these things because I grow up in the situation. I know what, for example, like Balenciaga and Whitman, for example, like sourcing from exactly. And they claim that they're also carrying some kind of political message. And this is a problematic part. When they're claiming this, like having a political message, you know. I don't know about fashion, anything. I don't know much about
politics.
But like, for example, when they claiming like a message and also selling this like the kind of like a sourcing from the politics, which is also like that happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and like also like how, for example, like they privatizing the poverty, and then it absolutely cancels all kind of political messages they have with us together, we fight together, all these kind of things, you know. And it's like that is like why it's also very popular, because it's a shortcut for youngsters to just like being political and political political, you know, active. It's just you buy Balenciaga shirt which costs like I don't know, a lot of money, and also claiming to be like a politically like active. This is also like which empties the mind from politics but acts as a politically, you know. The body as a kind of like carrying the political message but actually not delivering anything political.
It's also an economical factor, you know. If you think of the departure point for us was okay, a lot of these looks when we already burdened ourselves with this topic and we had to try to make some sense of it by looking at, okay, what are they actually producing, what are they sending out? And for us it was very recognizable as a style that maybe our moms and aunts had during the conflict years, which in itself is maybe also not, it can be an empowering thing, that's something that is actually coming from this possessed, less privileged perspective gets this luxurious status, but it's this element of value enhancement and disruption that happens. It's not really the moral thing of that it's introduced as an exclusive product. It's just the price range is so morbidly disproportional that this is actually what we try to address.
I was just thinking also, like, we had this conversation with Gago and I mentioned that this was also very familiar for me, that I also thought that the aesthetics, like certain kind of clothing for North African immigrants became also very trendy, for instance, in Paris or like in countries where these people are actually living from the wave, the immigration wave in the 60s, I would say. And it's also quite interesting that it is actually a pattern of inversing these values, that it is the poor that actually become the trendy one, right? Yeah. But there is also something that I thought was quite interesting also in the work, this idea of catching up, this anxiety of kind of catching up that the third world has. And it's quite contradictory with the fact that it becomes in fashion, like ironically enough, actually the model to look like, but at the same time we are really anxious to catch up with something that we can never really catch up with. Yeah. So you have the post-Soviet, this moment where suddenly you have to have a political model that aligned with the West, which was really impossible to catch up in like such a short time. And it's the same also for all kind of form of post-colonial places. And I think this is really also, fashion is also based on this model of continuously catching up, which is also how fashion also work, that you have always a pressure of something that you will always run behind, but you never. But maybe you can say something a bit more about this catching up, which you explained to me.
Yeah, catching up is very interesting point, because after the collapse of the Soviet Union, all kind of infrastructure created complete chaos, and we had to we completely embraced a new liberal system as a kind of solution of all kind of problems we had, without discussing, because we did not have any kind of I don't know, if in West, so-called Western world, there was discussions about the kind of cultural knowledge or political knowledge, what is work, how it works, what to say, what to give up or something. We did not have anything like this. It just collapsed, and it was huge market for the rest of the world. And we just opened up for everything. So in order, for example, for catch up, there was kind of conditions was set. In order to somehow catch up with democracy, you have to start privatizing the public sphere. So this is kind of a full-on politics is full-on kind of privatization, and this was kind of solution we thought. And in the end, we end up more Europeans than Europeans, because we privatize absolutely everything. We try to catch up with this a set of a democracy or something, whatever was imposed from outside. And in the end, with Balenciaga, we see this the poor bodies, which was creating this aesthetics. They see themselves in a loop of this aesthetic they created, they cannot afford anymore. So they keep catching up themselves in a loop of creating trace and going on loop.
This is a very important methodological tool that we also used, is the notion of cycle. So if you look at fashion, trends come and go, but they sort of repeat. There's this kind of repetition of things that come back in fashion. And we actually took this logic and tried to map it on a social, political agenda, things like nationalism, the rise of populism, fascism, all these things that are very present in the 90s on the Balkans, and that are actually coming back now in bigger and bigger numbers, which is really alarming.
Absolutely. I guess I'm trying to think about, so catching up is also subsumption, and fashion in the Philippines is a kind of element of capitalism. And what do you say about, so I think about, obviously it's really interesting this notion of temporality, basically combining of development, but with subsumption there's also always erosion. So where do you have anything to say about the bits of privatization that get left behind because they cannot get is that what the shoe is? Or?
No, I think in terms of privatization concretely, it's very important to contextualize it now, at least for us with this work, to textualize it in this technological paradigm, of usership. So these platforms that you're using and the kind of content that you're generating creates information which is privatized, that is not It is in the hands of big companies that regulate this information. You know? So there's elements of privatization that happen on several levels, even by just plain usership. So the things that you use as a technology are already, per definition, very privatized. But in terms of aversion, I think, I don't know. You mean in a style sense, or in what maybe the first question was here of how you can still buy shoes, or how do you mean?
No, but I'm wondering if your film is about a kind of total subsumption of the world, or if there's a kind of unevenness in what you're describing. Because in a way, to me, it is a kind of mapping. You're mapping the terrain and kind of seeing it from above in a way. Through the prism of the shoe or Balenciaga.
Yeah.
But is that how, I don't know, so in a way I'm just trying to ask, like, where does it fall apart? Can it fall apart, or is it kind of total consumption?
Yeah. But it's, for example, like it's like extremely new, like a new level, like high level of like a privatization, what we're talking about. For example, when Balenciaga can privatize the notion of Bernie Sanders, like idea of Bernie Sanders, or in general, what does it mean politically? It means like a completely different ways than Balenciaga does politics of Balenciaga. It might be then, but like this is kind of like a different forms of privatization, which was completely different than which was in 90s, like a straight form of like privatization of like a physical space. But now we have the forms of privatization, which is like a political idea that can be privatized. And this is Bernie Sanders, you know. And at the same time, I'm just speculating now, but like moving from Switzerland, like from Paris to Switzerland because of paying less taxes by Balenciaga, which then at the same time politically like supporting Balenciaga, and just like a privatizing idea of Bernie Sanders just doesn't make sense, you know. And this kind of quasi-political, like the activism is what I call like a completely new level of like a privatization.
Or the irony. I mean, there's a huge sense of irony in what they are doing, and they kind of reappropriate this. So they create trends by using things very ironically, and they create these trends based on sort of a meme logics by just appropriating. And this meme logic is something that we discussed. This is not just like a image. It's not just existing on an image level, it exists on a political level, on a social level. This logics of memes.
Sure, but what they do is basically all that is just like they're driven by their wish of like creating profit, right? So they're swallowing all these like cultural political ideas without any kind of like I don't know, like respect or anything, just in order to kind of like give the next shows to people who would be ready to pay like 2,000 euro for a bag, with like a Kia bag. So personally, you guys having a East European origin, do you feel like someone is just cashing on like some kind of like intimate experiences like in your past, like is this the reason why you didn't invite them?
Like as we said, it ended up discussing Balenciaga, but it's not about Balenciaga. So Balenciaga we use as a kind of ultimate form of privatization, which we try to use as a key to understand and open up the contemporary political context and economical context, how it functions nowadays. This is just a key to open up. But yeah, they're cashing up as others also, you know. And we just use this key, like this like way of cashing up to somehow understand the current context.
Maybe they need to do more than other brands, like they bring archetypes look from the poorest to the highest level luxury, and to bring this irony on stage. And I was just checking who's owning now Balenciaga. Balenciaga died in it was Robert Siskin in 1986. So, and there's some Russian CEO.
I think it's
you know?
Still by LVMH and Ash or something like a big conglomerate, fashion conglomerate.
Alright.
Yeah.
So maybe shall we stop here or?
Shall we continue with drinks outside?
Yes, let's continue with drinks outside.
Thanks for coming.